WWT presents Experts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of WWT Experts. I'm your host, Matthew Coble, and today I am delighted to introduce not one but two experts from worldwide technology in this episode of our four-part series on the global financial services industry and how that world is addressing things like artificial intelligence, data, security, and today's topic, tech debt. So we've got two guests with us. The first is David Reilly, who spent 10 years as CTO and later CIO of Bank of America prior to joining us here at Worldwide Technology. He's always sought to drive business results via digital transformation, and he really loves the way that adopting technology can be a positive force for business and the business outcomes you're looking for, but also the culture within organizations. In addition to his current role with us here at Worldwide Technology, David is an active board member, both with commercial and nonprofit organizations, and in those contexts, he's blending his passion for technology and a strong sense of human purpose, which I admire. Also joining us is Mark Wall, a Senior Director of Automation at Worldwide Technology. Mark has over 18 years of experience in global networking, application services, and, of course, automation. Mark always brings a good spirit of learning, innovation, and collaboration to his work, and he's always focused on the ways that automation can bring visibility and efficiency to the work we do with our clients to help them achieve the business objectives that they have. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Glad you could be here today.
Thanks, Matt. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me back, Matt. Excited to be here.
So, all right, we're talking about global financial services, and there's all kinds of amazing technologies that we could be speaking to on this, but we're talking about tech debt? Like, why are we talking about tech debt? Like, why should people care about that within this organization and others?
Because it's an impediment, Matt, to system transformation, to digitization, to really transforming your business and helping your business move at pace. All of us as practitioners are very focused on the new technologies, and so we should be in terms of the business opportunity that those afford us. But if we're not keeping pace by remediating our existing systems, our legacy systems, our tech debt, number one, it slows us down. It slows down the adoption of those new technologies, and so we can't embrace them to full effect. Number two, we all run very complex environments, but the more variability we have in the environment, the more valueless complexity there is. That drives up cost, and it increases risk. The more versions of systems that you have that you weren't able to rationalize or consolidate, the more things your cyber team has to protect, the more patching that has to be done, the more risk you run in the environment. So expenses go up, you run more risk, and it slows down the adoption of new technology. And those dots absolutely connect everything we need to do, Matt, in terms of innovation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, David, great point. And I would say there's really also another factor we're seeing too is attracting and retaining talent, right? If we're always focusing on tech debt all the time, it's how are we going to attract new talent? How are we going to drive, energy and excitement to really go from operating to innovating? So making sure that the people factor and really the focus on the business alignment of those IT initiatives is in the right direction.
All right, well, I'm buying into this tech debt idea, but I'm curious if you have some success stories that you could speak to of good examples of organizations really addressing that in financial services or otherwise to kind of further illustrate the point.
I think there are four components that to be best in class at tackling this challenge, you really need in place. Number one, you need a decent asset inventory that shows you what's out there that you need to ensure stays current. Sounds like a very simple thing, but it's surprising how many organizations don't have good authoritative data about all the assets, hardware and software they have on their network. Second, when does all that stuff go end of life? When's it going to stop being supported? Without the calendar married to the asset inventory, you don't understand the risks that you're running. Third, how am I using all of that technology? Because I've got to prioritize the order in which I'm going to address that debt. And I should do that based on the most important business processes, that these systems support. And fourth, and I think really best in class, is having the very difficult conversation inside your corporation about, so how much tech debt are we willing to run? Generally speaking, the first time you ask that question, none is going to be the answer, but we all know that's not true. We don't have infinite money and infinite time to tackle this. And as a practitioner, I think we have a responsibility to ensure we have that risk appetite conversation to say, how much debt are we willing to run in a given year? and ensuring that we're regularly reporting on that. It's also, by the way, a great way to keep focused on this problem. Can't do that without the inventory, the calendar, and then the ways in which you're using the technology.
Some of those sound like automation challenges, right?
It really is, Matt. And I would say, bringing up some of the points you mentioned is having an accurate inventory. It's such a big challenge for many organizations is, I have this system say this one thing, I have this sort of vendor say another thing, I have my other internal spreadsheet say a different thing. So really bringing all of that data together to be able to make an accurate inventory and accurate data to make those decisions is really key. And especially having those insights from those multiple vectors. How am I managing risk? What am I spending? How much is in use is going to be able to shape some of that operational intelligence that you really need to maximize really the output of the IT and really minimize those businesses' risk that you mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm. And I imagine that some organizations out there have probably a little bit of a myopic view of their technical infrastructure, and they may need a partner from the outside to help them see where they do in fact have some tech debt, right? So, how do you counsel clients to find the right partners to do that sort of evaluation and addressing of tech debt that's out there?
All of the customers that will listen to this conversation today will have one thing in common, and that will be they will be running a heterogeneous environment. They will have one of everything. Every large enterprise has that. So I think finding the right partner, Matt, is one that understands what it means to run a heterogeneous environment. You're not overly wedded to one technology or one OEM or versus another. It's the entirety of the ecosystem that you need to manage. That's where the risk is. So finding a partner that understands the heterogeneity of the environment is number one. Number two, a partner with really deep OEM relationships that can really help you understand when this stuff is going end of life. One of the constant frustrations I had as CTO or CIO is that my own team would come to me with 30 days left to tell me that something was going end of life. That feels like a ransom note. There's nothing you can do in that moment. Finding a partner that can help you not get a 30-day view, but a 3-year view helps you be way more proactive with your business partners to say, maybe next year we've got a peace dividend because there's less going end of life. This year we have some heavy lifting. Mm-hmm. The more you can do that with a forward-looking view, Mark, I think take some of the panic out of the discussion. And I've always found 3 years, if you can get there with the right partner, is a great arc to have a view over.
Absolutely. And I would even say, just in the dynamic situation of the world today with data and then AI and how are we bringing, data science and correlation and these other metrics. So things like what are the, change window availability, how much utilization and dependencies from critical applications do these specific pieces of assets have. So really having a partner that understands not only sort of the infrastructure, the bigger picture, but bringing more of a systems and a data science view to the conversation is really going to maximize that and also set you up for the future as well.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's interesting, but also think that there probably are some internal partners we got to bring to the table too. Isn't that right, David?
Absolutely, Matt. And there are actually several. If you're the infrastructure owner of the assets that are going end of life, there are a couple of partners or stakeholders I keep in mind. Number one is the CIO or the head of the application development team. In my experience, there was never a time when code was cracked open to do some end-of-life remediation for the purposes of infrastructure where I didn't learn something I wished wasn't true about that code, stuff that was hard-coded in. It's a great opportunity to learn about ways in which the code could be improved. So the CIO or the head of application is one. The CISOs too. The more variability in the environment, the more things that need to be protected, the more complexity, the more risk you run of vulnerabilities being exposed. So your CISO can be a great partner. And risk and audit are two more that I would mention. I worked with a chief risk officer that described his job across the entirety of the business as figuring out all the ways we could win, all the ways we could lose, and plotting the best path straight down the middle. End-of-life risk is part of that. And so your chief risk officer will really appreciate the transparency, as will the head of audit, so that you can show that you've got that visibility of those risks and that you've got those risks under management and that you're intentional about the risk that you're running in terms of end of life.
Well, so I'm also imagining it's a challenge internally to think like, all right, I recognize as an IT leader that we've got to deal with some tech debt, but if I'm talking to my business audiences or even my senior executives, Many of them are probably excited about the new and emerging things like AI, right? So how do you counsel clients to frame those conversations so the tech debt is taken seriously and really addressed in the midst of all this exciting new technology that we could decide about?
As technology practitioners, we've never seen a business problem that we couldn't build a new system to solve for. We're great at building the new. We're pretty terrible at retiring the old. And I think that presents two challenges for us as practitioners. The first is to be very direct with the business to explain if we don't remediate this legacy technology, it is going to create outages. It is going to inject risk into the business. And I think going as far as saying if we do not in the next 24 months address this part of the network or this part of the compute infrastructure or this part of the application infrastructure, because we have a world of hard choices to make. There's never enough time, never enough change windows to Mark's point, never enough money. We've got to decide what we're not going to do just as much as we are what it is that we are going to do. Articulating not addressing tech debt as a decision to buy outages, I think, is a best practice. It's an extraordinarily difficult conversation to have because nobody wants to hear that. But as practitioners that own these assets, we know that that is true. That if something is unsupported, an incident will occur, the risk of outage is higher. Explaining to the business a decision not to remediate this environment is not a decision not to remediate it, it's a positive decision to buy outages, I think helps focus the conversation because that's ultimately what it is that you're doing. You're deciding to live with more unreliability, more fragility in the environment. And as a practitioner, I think you could describe our job as, I never want to surprise my business. I don't mind disappointing them from time to time. We were very clear that this might happen. We're going to move heaven and earth to make sure it doesn't. But if it does, we're going to work hard to restore. But none of us have the right to be surprised. And I think sometimes as practitioners, we hold back on that, Matt. We're not direct enough to say this fragility is going to lead to more business reliability issues, more production incident issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Dave, great point. And I would say being able to quantify that cost of doing nothing versus the cost of doing something and be able to measure that. So things like, how many incidents, what is the cost of an outage, what is the, capital that I require to make an investment, and what's that return on investment? So really having those data points of, what is the cost of doing nothing and that hostage note. I love that analogy. I'm gonna have to use that here pretty soon. But more importantly, if I have to spend a little bit of money and time and energy to be able to mitigate something, I need to be able to show that back to the business very simply and easily. So again, having those insights and those data points and doing some correlation and some analysis is going to be key to be able to show that to the business.
And I think sometimes as practitioners, we hold back from having that conversation because we don't think there'll be a willing audience. And I think we have to admit to ourselves, there are two doors you can walk through here. There's the decision door to buy outages, and there's the other very uncomfortable door, which is when you have the outage, and then you have to explain that the reason this thing went wrong was because we were running on unsupported hardware. That is a very, very uncomfortable place to be. Your team looks bad, you look bad, you don't look like you're in charge of the risk, you're in control of the risk. So which of those choices do you want to take? Because you're going to find yourself going through one of those doors. And any practitioner there that has had a certificate renewal outage, where the date expires and now the website's gone down, and all of us have been through it, it's that in spades, because as great a business partner as you may have today, explaining that their business took an outage because you were running something that was no longer supported is a very, very hard hit to take credibility-wise.
And you're saying that takes a little bit more than 30 days notice, probably?
It takes a little bit more than 30 days notice.
Yeah, I think so. Well, Mark, let me ask you this question. If a client approaches you and they kind of want to talk about tech debt and have this really earnest conversation about it, what kind of preparation work would you like them to do ahead of time to have that conversation? Is it more like a mindset? Is it more ready to embrace the change? Is it more of a tech inventory? Like, what do you need them to bring to the table to have a great success there?
Yeah, I think it's like doing math problems back in school and college, right? It's show your work. To David's point, how do you show that back to the business? So we think of sort of maybe call it 3 vectors to think about, to use sort of the the analogy that I made earlier, but creating insights into what do I have? What's my inventory? Do I know what I have? Do I need to discover what I have? Do I need to consolidate information? And then what am I paying? That second vector being financial. What is the cost? What am I spending? Bringing those insights into that. And then that third sort of vector that you would really want to bring together is the analytics and the telemetry. What is actually going on? How much is in use? And you bring all of those components together, and it's what we call a data cube, right? And with that data cube, and that sort of allows you to sort of leverage AI and sort of other actionable insights, allows you to show that back to the business. So really getting a handle and working with your different teams across finance, across the inventory management team, and working on the observability and observation teams is going to allow you to bring all that together and then start applying some of the concepts we talked about earlier today.
Juniper's first AI-native networking platform is specifically designed to utilize AIOps to guarantee optimal end-to-end experiences for both operators and end users. This advanced platform ensures that every connection is reliable, measurable, and secure across all devices, users, applications, and assets.
Well, so let me ask this question. Do you believe it's better as an organization is embracing tech debt? Do you weave that into existing projects and process flows? Is it separate and distinct, a tech debt project? And are you looking more for those sort of incremental improvements over time, or is it better to have big wins, big swats at tech debt so that you're taking down? Like, what's the best approach?
I think the first two, not the third. I think the third is a shortcut to more time with your family, because that's money that will not be well spent.
Yeah.
But being intentional, Matt, if there is a project or a program where you're upgrading a piece of the infrastructure driven by an application refresh, what would it take for the systems that surround that application to be remediated from a tech debt perspective? Being transparent with the program owner to say, for a little bit more, maybe we can address this much more debt. That's a great moment to say, do we have an appetite to do that or not? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I do think ultimately there's an amount of spend almost every year that you have to be investing. There's never going to be a year where there's nothing, Matt. There'll be a year where there's less. So I think recognition, and this comes back to that 3-year arc of what's going end of life when, a steady stream of investment to allow you to remediate the highest risk pieces of technology that support the highest risk business processes, and being situationally aware about other places in the environment where you're doing upgrades to see, can I spend a little bit more to tackle the surrounding debt in those cases? Those two, I think, as being constant rhythms that you develop in the organization, are healthy things to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think to add on to what David said is we also see opportunities if you have a large renewal or a large sort of purchasing event and that's 6-9 months out. Perfect opportunity to say, maybe I should start planning and start thinking about this, right? There's also the aspect of a game of inches. How do I incrementally along the way, but really saying, hey, I got a large renewal. I need to refresh, these 10,000 devices. Do I know what they're doing? Is it all 10,000 that are in use? So sort of backdropping a very strategic and intentional idea and plan with sort of an upcoming purchase event. We also see an opportunity to drive an immediate ROI. And with that, you can show the business, here's how I can make an incremental investment and create a return on that investment, and then replicate that across the environment to really sort of showcase this. So I think it's also important to be strategic, as well as then, how do I start this conversation? How do I optimize my path to be able to drive this as an outcome for the business?
I think one of the things you see, if you only have this conversation at budget time, you lose.
Yep.
Because there's so much competition for that same investment dollar. Mm-hmm. And this is one of those conversations you can have any time of the year. That 3-year arc enables you to be articulating to your chief auditor, to your chief risk officer, to your CISO, all the areas where there is debt, tech debt, legacy tech in the environment that has to be managed. Don't wait for the budget, because I think if that's the moment, as a practitioner, you're having this conversation, you just get crowded out. Mm-hmm. And there's really no reason to wait. You can be having this dialogue, this risk-oriented dialogue, throughout the course of the year. And you'll get more airtime if you choose to do this outside of the budgeting process.
Mm-hmm. Well, as I listen to this conversation about tech debt, it makes me think that a key aspect of tech debt is change management, right? And anytime I think about change management, I think about the underlying culture of the organization. So what kinds of organizations out there, what kind of cultures do you see that are the most effective to embrace this? And also, how do you provide coaching to an organization to prepare their culture to be more open to dealing with tech debt?
Yeah, and I would say a lot of what we talked about earlier is taking strategic and calculated risks, but those risks are backed up with insights and data points. So as an example, hey, I have these 10,000 devices. Here's my 3-year end of life plan. Here's sort of what they're doing today. Here's the utilization. Here's what they're connected to, right? Having that sort of path of here's all the dependencies of these assets is going to allow you to go back to the change windows, to the control board, to be able to confidently say, here's what it's doing and here's what I'm looking to be able to do and mitigate, and be confident and drive that change. Additionally, automation's a key player in that, right? How do I automate my testing? How do I automate my validation? How do I bring together the application and the infrastructure teams closer together through sort of a shared experience? So I think a culture of taking calculated risks, but are based on sort of inherent data, right? That I can confidently come back and drive those outcomes that I'm looking for.
That intent around the risk that I'm running, I think, is key. I worked with an exec that showed me the mistake that I had made for years and years and years, thinking there's 52 weekends in the year, 12 of those are out because they're month end, there's a bunch of others that are out because of other reasons for a change freeze. I got 26 moments in a year where I could be executing change, and then within those 26, I've got to weave in tech debt. And this exec said to me, well, why do you need to do it at a weekend? There are some changes we could do midweek if we have an intentional dialogue with the business, if it's going to help lower tech debt. I'd never considered that. I had a blind spot. But that discussion meant that we opened up a series of other windows, not for everything, Matt, but for certain others, around if we're intentional with the risk we're taking. Mark, to your point around what's the risk appetite here versus the risk we're actually going to take, you can broaden the number of apertures you've got to remediate some of the environment.
Well, I want to drill on this a little bit more. Like, I'm thinking also about the people side of this, right? Do you need a really strong leader who's tackling tech debt? Do you need to kind of weave a tech debt mindset into the culture of your teams? Like you talked about, application teams, infrastructure coming closer together. There's a people problem there. So what kinds of people are good at this, and how do you kind of encourage those types of behaviors?
Yeah, and I can speak to sort of what I see, and I love David's thoughts as well. We see people that are very collaborative, that are willing to sort of, cross the lines of the application, the infrastructure teams, even the financial teams and the lines of business. And I think that's really key. Is where we see success is people that are embracing change and sort of want to work toward a collective goal. But really what we've seen is it's going to start at the top. It's really going to start from leadership, sort of bringing these folks together and sort of driving this change. But David, would love your thoughts here.
I think this is where, as the leader in the organization or the leader of this particular technical discipline inside the organization, it has to come from you. None of us interview for and hire people who we want, and none of us came into the industry because we wanted to remediate legacy technology. None of us got here for that reason. All of us know that if we don't, in some measure, do that, we can't do the work that really excited us to get in the industry in the first place. Because of that, it's often relegated to a second or third or fourth class problem. The remediation for that, I think the antidote for that comes from the top. If you're the head of networking, if you're the CIO, if you're the CTO, if you're the head of payment systems, whichever leadership role you've got in the organization, it's directly incumbent on you to legitimize this conversation. How much risk am I running with end of life? I'm going to take some because these are all for-profit endeavors. And if I take no risk, I don't make any money. So I've got to take some risk. I want to be intentional about that risk. That's why I think, Matt, it's got to come from the top. I learned that the hard way, that it was something that I had to legitimize with my own team. Doing that opens up the floodgates to have the really intentional conversation about where I want to take risk and where I don't, and where I've got to have that dialogue and engagement with the business.
Well, so as financial institutions and other organizations make progress with tech debt, what are some of the key measures of success that they should be looking for? And are there particular tools that they should be using to do that measurement or to support the outcomes they're looking for?
I think, Matt, to kind of what I said earlier, is really thinking about building that sort of data cube model, I think is going to be key. Yep. So we can all sort of look at cost savings. We can all look at, how many tickets, how many incidents, but trying to bring those together and having sort of a dynamic lever to say, well, for the business and what I'm trying to achieve now to mitigate some of this tech debt, I have to refresh in the next 24 months. It may cost me $1 million, but I'm going to save 25 million in outages, right? So really starting the journey of being comfortable with creating data and insights and starting consolidating that to use it at a later time is really going to be key. So measuring not only the incidents, but the requests, the operational components of this, and really sort of getting those metrics are really going to be key to start the journey to mitigate tech debt.
And how much of each business environment is running on end-of-life hardware or software, and what does that look like next year if we don't remediate what's ahead of us now? I think keeping that front and center and showing that view by critical business processes, which every business has, if you can link the business process to the underlying hardware and software and show where your business is running end-of-life, then you can have the right engagement with the businesses to say, is that enough risk? Can you live with that amount of risk? Or do we really have to reprioritize our work and lower the overall risk?
Yeah, David, that's a great point. Not all sort of business functions are created equal. If it's your core ERP system and it's swimming in 25-year-old sort of infrastructure, that's going to get a different priority than, maybe some, remote satellite location where there's folks there only certain times of the year. So being able to map that to the line of business, to those critical applications are really going to be able to be key for this.
All right. Well, I'm imagining, so last question, I'm imagining that a lot of the audience here is like buying into this idea of tech debt. I know I am from hearing you guys talk. If you're providing counsel to a business leader, a technology leader, what are the 2 or 3 pieces of advice you really would give to them in this moment to say, all right, you're going to address tech debt in your organization. Remember these 2 or 3 things. What do you say?
2, number 1, the asset inventory. Without the asset inventory married to the calendar, I don't think this is you don't know what risk you're running, therefore you can't be intentional around managing that risk. But I would also say there's some really interesting work on the horizon where if you have legacy code bases that you have to remediate, that inventory and that calendar shows you, some of the Copilot coding assistant technologies that exist can help you learn the underlying code of that legacy application. Maybe those developers that wrote that aren't in your organization anymore. You can point those coding technologies toward that legacy code base to help you understand, at least as a starting point, as a baseline, how much remediation would I have to do. I think there's some technologies there that's really going to help us tackle this problem in the years to come. But without the calendar and the asset inventory, you don't know what risk you're running.
Yeah, and I think there's 2. First one is, it's actually a sort of a motto of Worldwide in certain aspects. It's trust but verify. So I may feel like I have an accurate inventory, but how do I know? How do I prove that? How do I bring in multiple different sources to rationalize that, to making sure it's true, and do that dynamically, do that on an ongoing basis? I think the second one is prove it. How do I prove it? How do I prove that I can pull in the change windows and prove the sort of the financial lever? So being able to trust but verify and prove and really show your work back to the business is going to be really the keys for success.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, excellent moment here to share your expertise with us. Thanks for coming so much, David, Mark.
Thank you, Matt.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us as well. Another great expert session. We've got a great back catalog out on WWT.com of shows like this you can watch on demand at any time. Calendar of upcoming episodes to check out. You can put that on your calendar and come and drop and watch it. We always love to get your feedback, so please do take that survey and the email invite, or just drop us an email and let us know how we did. And with that, we'll wrap our session for today. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.